Hello everybody, this is Network Security and Cryptography, and today we are going to study the last lecture of Module 2, which is the lecture 7. And I've already mentioned that to understand or to have the concept of lecture 7, you need to go through the entire lecture series of Module 2. So do not miss any of the lectures if you want to understand lecture 7 completely. Right, so I'll I'm your guide Akanksha Singh, who will be taking you through this entire series of lectures, and I welcome you all. Let's start with today's first topic, which is discrete log. Now, what do you mean by discrete log? Discrete logs are fundamentals to number of public key algorithms. You'll be seeing one of the example just now in this video, which is Diffie-Hellman exchange. We'll also be using discrete log as a fundamental concept in digital signature algorithm. So we'll be repeating the same discrete log method in digital signature algorithm, and we'll be seeing the discrete logs usage in Diffie-Hellman exchange too. So today, one of the concept of discrete log we are going to discuss is primitive roots. Now, what do you mean by primitive roots? Now, let us to understand primitive roots, let us first understand that we are going to take a value p. We're going to understand that there's a value p which is a prime number, and b is set to be, and small b is set to be prime of primitive root of p. B is said to be primitive root of p if there's a condition, if power of b, that is b to the power 1, b to the power 2, b to the power 3, includes all the numbers that are less than prime number p minus 1. Do you understand this? See, so any number is a primitive root of a prime number. Any number is a primitive root of a prime number when the power of that number, any power, b to the power 1, b to the power 2, b to the power 3, any power, includes all numbers that are less than p minus 1. Right, if you remember, I told you what is a totient function. Totient function, if you have to find out totient function of p, which is equivalent to p minus 1, so or equal to totient function of p. We've discussed totient function in lecture 4 or 5, right, if you remember. So includes all the numbers that are less than p minus 1 or equal to totient function, right? So note that the power of b forms a repeating cycle. I'll just now show you that these power values will be having a cycle, and these cycles will be repeating itself, right? These cycles will be repeating itself, and the cycle should not be longer than the p minus 1 value. The cycle should have the length of p minus 1, should not be longer than p minus 1. So b is a primitive root of p if the cycle is as long as totient function or p minus 1. So you'll be seeing that these powers are going to have cycles, and if the cycle is as long as p minus 1, then that power of p is going to be called as primitive root of p, right? And remember that the cycle should have all the unique values, should have all the values, and all the values should be unique. All the values less than the p, and all the values should be unique. Let me pick up an example so that you can understand what am I talking about. Okay, so I'll be picking up an example wherein I'll be finding out the primitive root of 7. Now, primitive root of 7, let me first find out primitive root of 7. So this is my p here. Okay, this is prime. Yes, this is prime. So I am supposed to find out primitive roots of p, which is b, which is I'm going to mention them as powers. Okay, so here I have taken a as the primitive root. If a is the primitive root of p, I know that I have to calculate the powers, right? A to the power 1, a to the power 2, a to the power 3, a to the power 4, a to the power 5, a to the power 6. Why till 6? Because I want the length of these powers should be p minus 1. We are going to calculate the power of a only till p minus 1, right? And I have mentioned the numbers also from 1 to 6 because I do not want to extend my length from, beyond p minus 1, that is 7. 7 minus 1, which is 6. Okay, so let me start finding out the value. How will you find out the value? Just see this. I have written a formula here. A to the power I mod 7. So here a to the power 1 mod 7. My a is first going to be 1. This is going to be my a for the first row. Okay, so my a is going to be 1. So if my a is 1, 1 to the power 1 mod 7 is going to give me 1, right? So 1 to the power 2 is again 1, 1 to the power 3, 4, 5, 6, all the powers is going to be having 1. So 1 mod 7 is always going to be 1. So this is my first value of the row, right? If my a is 2, now if my a is 2, the first time I'll be calculating 2 to the power 1 mod 7. Okay, 2 to the power 1 mod 7, which is going to give me 2. At the second value, I'm going to calculate 2 to the power 2 mod 7, which is 4, right? At the third value, 2 to the power 3. 2 to the power 3 mod 7 is going to give me the remainder as 1, right? Now 2 to the power 4. Now 2 to the power 4 mod 7 is going to give me remainder as 2. Now 2 to the power 5. 2 to the power 5 is going to give me remainder as 4. Now 2 to the power 6 is going to give me remainder as 2 to the power 6 mod 7 is going to give me remainder as 1. Can you see there's a repeating cycle? 2 4 1 2 4 1. So the cycle will always end at 1. Always remember this. The cycle will always end at 1. So in the first row, since there are only ones, there's a repeating group of size 1. 1 ends here, 1 starts and ends here, 1 starts and ends here, 1 starts and ends here. Similarly 2 4 1 starts here and ends at 1. 2 4 1 starts here and ends at 1. So you can see that there's a repeating group, right? Coming to a is equal to 3. Similarly, when you calculate for a is equal to 3, 3 to the power 1 mod 7 is going to give me 3. 3 to the power 2 mod 7 is going to give me 2. 3 to the power 3 mod 7 is going to give me 6. 3 to the power 4 mod 7 is going to give me 4. 3 to the power 5 mod 7. Keep calculating using calculator, or I have told you modular exponentiation in my lecture 3. Please use modular exponentiation for that. I have already calculated the values, therefore I am mentioning them so that I do not waste my time. Moving ahead to the a is equal to 4 value, the answer will be 2 4 1 2 4 2 1 4 2 1. For 5 the value will be 5 4 6 2 3 1. For 6 the value will be 6 1 6 1 6 1, right? So can you see there are repeating cycles? One for 1 it is only 1 1 1, so repeating cycle size is 1. For 2 repeating cycle is 2 4 1 2 4 1, so the size of the cycle is 3 here. And for a is equal to 3, the cycle is 3 2 6 4 5 1. Basically it ends here. So can you see the size of my cycle here is as long as the size p minus 1. So what was my primitive root? The definition of primitive root said that b is a primitive root of p if the cycle is as long as torsion function p or p minus 1. B is a primitive root of p. Therefore, we can say that here my 3 a is equal to 3, a is equal to 3 is a primitive root of 7. Right, because the length of the cycle is as long as the length of the p minus 1. Similarly, for 4 to 1, the cycle ends here, so size is smaller than size is only 3. 4 to 1, size is only 3. For 5, size is 5 4 6 2 3 1, right? It basically ends here. So the size of the cycle of A is equal to 5 is as long as P minus 1. Therefore, you can say another primitive root of 7 is 5. So, a number can have multiple primitive roots, right? For 6, can you see 6, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1? So, this cycle is size is only of 2. Since it is not of P minus 1, it is not a primitive root. So, therefore, A is equal to 5 and A is equal to 3. Both of them are primitive roots of 7. I hope you've understood the entire concept we discussed earlier. I told you P is a prime number. B is said to be primitive root of P. How will you calculate it? By calculating the power mod P, and you will be going till the numbers P minus 1 or torsion function P. Note that powers of B will be forming repeating cycles that we've already seen, and these cycles will not be longer than P minus 1. That is also acceptable. We also saw that B is a primitive root of P if the cycle is as long as torsion function P or P minus 1, and the cycle has all the values that are unique, right? Can you see all the values are unique? 3, 2, 6, 4, 5, 1. These numbers are not going to repeat, and this cycle is going to have all the numbers that are less than 7. All the numbers that are less than 7. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6, right? So this is all about primitive roots. Moving ahead to my next topic. Now my next topic is symmetric key distribution using symmetric encryption. We've already studied about symmetric key distribution. If you remember my the last video, I talked about how symmetric key distribution is done. I told you there were 3 methods, right? A can select a key and physically deliver it to B, if you remember. And I told you the second method was a third party can select the key and physically deliver it to both the parties A and B. And one more method was if A and B have previously and recently communicated, can use the previous key for generating the new key. That is how you can share the symmetric key. Now there's one more methodology for sharing the key, which is Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Now this is very important, and all of us must know what is Diffie-Hellman key exchange methodology. So coming up to understanding of Diffie-Hellman key exchange methodology. Now the purpose of this algo is just to enable two users to exchange a key that can be used for subsequent encryptions of message. Okay, so Diffie-Hellman algo depends on the effectiveness of discrete log. If you remember, I just now told you that discrete logs will be used in Diffie-Hellman exchange. So Diffie-Hellman is more efficient, or it is said to be more efficient when the effectiveness of discrete log is more, right? So the more the difficult is discrete log in Diffie-Hellman, the more will be the effectiveness of Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Okay, so moving ahead, for Diffie-Hellman key exchange, the algo is as follows, right? So let's start seeing what is the algo. Now the algo says that there are two publicly known numbers. Two publicly known numbers, one is Q and one is A. Here Q is the prime number and A is the primitive root of Q. Right, we have just now seen this concept in discrete log. Okay, so Q is my prime number here and A is the primitive root of Q. All of us know how to calculate the primitive root of Q. Both these two values are going to be publicly known numbers. They are not secret to anybody, they are just publicly known. Okay, after this, suppose A and B, these are two parties that wish to exchange the key. Right, suppose there are two parties A and B and they wish to exchange key. What will A do? User A will then select a random integer XA. How? Such that this XA value is less than Q. Such that this XA value is less than Q. After doing this, after selecting a number, it will compute a value ya. It will compute a value ya such that it is equal to a to the power xa, which is just now chosen by a. Then find out mod q of this. Okay, after computing ya, coming back to user b. Now what user b will do, user b will again decide upon a random number xb, which is going to be less than q, and then compute yb. After computing yb as a to the power xb mod q, each sides will keep the value, as you can see, each sides will keep the value of x as private. The value of x will be kept as private, and value of y will be made public to everybody. So x, since everybody, since a has chosen a random number x, and since b has chosen a random number xb, both these x numbers are very private to them. Okay, and they will make what, they will make public value as ya and yb. Okay, so moving forward, how will be they sharing the key? Now after doing this, each user then computes a k value, and k value is equal to yb to the power xa mod q, and then b is going to compute k such that k is equal to ya to the power xb mod q, right? So this is how key value is going to be computed. Now remember, both these values are same. Both these values are same. How both these values are same? Let me derive it for you and tell you that both these k values are going to, both these methods are going to give you same k value. How? Just see, if k is equal to yb to the power xa mod q, I'm going to start from this equation and come back to this equation. Okay, so yb to the power xa. Now what is the value of yb? What is the value of yb? Yb is equal to x to the power x a to the power xb mod q. So you can write here x to the power b, x to the power a mod q, right? Okay, so further you can write this as a to the power xa, and you can take out xb out, right? Now can you see that ya is equal to a to the power xa mod q? So you can say that your a to the power xa is equal to ya, and whole to the power xb mod q. If you can see, this is the value here. This is equivalent to this value, right? So similarly, both the values are, both these equations are going to give me same value, and that is the concept. Let me take up an example and illustrate it more for you. Example, maybe q is already known and given to you as 353, and a is given to you as 3. Okay, and a selects xa to be 97, and b selects xb to be 233. Now this is some data which is given to me already. Now after this, what will I do? After this, a will compute ya. How will it compute ya? A is equal to xa mod q. A is equal to xa mod q, which is 3 to the power 97 mod 353, right? If you find out the answer for this, the remainder will be 40. Okay, modular exponentiation method, or you can use Fermat's theorem for this. Moving ahead to finding out yb. Now for yb, the value is going to be a to the power xb mod q. So it is going to be 3 to the power 233 mod 353. The remainder for this is going to be 248. Okay, after doing this, each of these will be calculating value of key, which is going to be y to the power b, which is 248, just now calculated, 248 to the power 97 mod 353, which is going to give me value as 160. Similarly, when the other side B calculates the value of K, the value of K will now be 40 to the power 233 mod 353, which is going to be give me again 160. Right, so both the values are the same. This is how the questions for the Diffie-Hellman exchange are asked. Often the value of Q, A, XA and XB is given, and you're supposed to find out which key is being shared. Okay, so that's easy for you. Coming to the next topic, which is public key distribution. Now, the first method, there are several techniques of distribution, and I'm going to discuss the first method as public announcement of public keys. Now, how is this done? Basically, the basic point of public key encryption is that the public key is public, right? Uh, that means any participant can announce the public key or broadcast the public key to the community at large. Okay, so although the approach is very convenient because we can broadcast it easily or we can communicate it to the large party, but there's a weakness associated with announcing the public key. What is the weakness? That is, anyone can forge such public announcement. That is, some users could pretend to be user A and send public key to another participants or broadcast such public key. So forging here of public key is very easy. So this is one disadvantage of public announcement, right? So the public announcement of public key is basically the announcement of public keys by broadcasting the message to a large community, and the disadvantage to this is anybody can forge it. Anybody can pretend to be A and then send public key of A. Okay, so moving ahead to the second method, which is public available directory. Now, to a greater degree security, this provides a greater degree security, which is not there in public announcement of public key. Now, what is done here? Basically, here there's a third party public key directory. Now, this third party maintains all the public keys of different users. Basically, there are different elements. One is public key authority, which maintains the directory with a name and public key for each participant, right? And there are each participants which registers with the public key authority and sends its own public key to the public key directory. And similarly, B also, you can see first it will register with the public key directory and then send its public key to the public key directory, right? And from here, this directory will anybody can see from this directory what is the public key of A, what is the public key of B, right? So this is one method of maintaining the public key, and this is a trusted method because the third party is the trusted party and keeps the registered users public key only. Coming to the third method, the third method is public key authority, right? The public key authority method is a stronger security than the previous one which we saw as public key directory. Now, what do we do here? By this diagram, we would try to understand what are we doing here. Basically, try and understand there's a public key authority here also, and there's a sender or there's a receiver, there's an initiator or there's a responder. Now, all these parties will be registering their public key with the public key authority and then communicating, right? See, let us see how this will be done. For maybe for A, suppose A wants to request public key authority to register itself and then send a public key for initiator. Here, what will be done? A will not decide its public key. Basically, public key authority will give here, basically, in addition to each participant reliably knows the public key for the authority, with only the authority knowing the corresponding private key, right? So the following steps that you can understand is, the first step is step 1. At step 1, A will send a timestamp T1. Timestamp is just to tell the time of the message, right? So A sends a timestamp message to the public key authority containing a request, right? Containing a request for current public key of B. Basically, initiator A wants to know what is the public key of B. So what it will do, it will request for the request to the public key authority for the public key of another respondent, which is B. Okay, so after requesting, what public key authority will do, public key authority then responds with the message encrypted using authority private key. As you can see here, this is the authority's private key. This is how you encrypt the message. This is how public key authority will encrypt the message. Basically, there will be an encryption done using private key of the authority, and what will be encrypted, the public key of B will be encrypted with the request that is being sent here and with the timestamp that is just now sent. Okay, so this is sent to the initiator. Now initiator can use this for communication. How? Basically, initiator will extract the public key of B. How it will extract? Because initiator A knows what is the public key of public key authority. So after receiving a message which is encrypted by public key private key of authority, the initiator A will decrypt the message by public key of authority and get PUB, which is the public key of B. After getting public key of B, now the third step is that initiator A will then encrypt the message that A wants to send to B using public key of B, and will also mention what is its ID so that it can refer that it is me. The original initiator A is the original one with the nuance. Now what is a nuance? Now nuance is something which is used for identifying identifying the transaction that is being done. So this is how initiator A is going to talk to a respondent. Okay, after this, if respondent wants to communicate to A, what it would do, it would then again request public key authority for getting the public key of A. How it will do, it will request with the timestamp. Public key authority will encrypt the message with its own private key and then send the public key of A to respondent. After respondent receives the public key of A, it can then communicate with initiator A. How? It will then encrypt the message using the public key of A with the nuance that was there with the initiator A and with its original nuance N2. Okay, after the initiator A receives a message of encryption, initiator A then sends an encrypted message for confirmation to responder. This is the entire set of communication that is going to carry forward if the public key authority, that is the dynamic key authority, is used for communication of public key. Moving ahead to the next method, which is public key certificates. Public key certificate is the fourth method. Now the certificates can be used by the participants to exchange key without containing a public key authority. Now certificate consists of public key, as you can see here, an identifier, and there's a timestamp associated to it. This is how a certificate is created. Now let me show you a picture of how the certificates are created and how the certificates are then used for communication. See, if A wants a certificate, what A would do, A would first communicate its own public key to the certificate authority, and then the certificate authority would send a certificate to A. This certificate will contain the public key of A, right? After A has got its certificate, B can also do the same. B will also send its public key to the certificate authority, and certificate authority will then send a certificate of B to B. After A and B have got its own certificate, A can then communicate its certificate to B, and B can then communicate its certificate to A, so that they can communicate by a certificate, right? Since certificate is being traveled on network instead of public keys being traveled, we are basically trying to hide the public keys too and providing more security to the traveling of public key certificates. Okay, this is how, fourth method, this is how you can communicate public key. So basically we saw four methodologies of communicating public keys. One was simple, just the announcement. The second one was where we kept the public keys with the public key directory, right? The third one was the basically here the public key was not openly being traveled. Anybody who wanted the public key of another respondent would first request the public key authority, that the public key authority would send a message to the initiator, and then so on. This was public key authority, after which we did public key certificates. Now public key certificates, basically here the public key was in form of certificates were being communicated for communicating the public keys. So this is the end of the module 2. I'll be moving forward to the next module, and also we'll be discussing about the patterns of certificate. This is one pattern that I've shown you. These certificates are not as simple as you can see here. There are a lot of standards for generating certificates too. So we'll be seeing different standards also. And thank you for listening and being patient. Please stay tuned to all my lectures. Thank you so much.